Welcome to Sustainable Packaging with Cory Connors. Today's guests are my friends from Green Blue and the SPC. We've got Dr. Ruth Maust and Mr. Tom Pollok. How are you guys?
Great.
Doing great. How are you, Cory?
Happy to be here.
Great. Ruth, let's start with you and talk a little bit about your background. I know you're newer to Green Blue, but we're excited to hear where you came from.
Yeah, so my background is in chemistry, and I've always been really interested in how to use chemistry as a set of tools to solve sustainability problems. So that was a pretty good fit for Green Blue and SPC. And since I joined, I've been working on issues relating to plastic packaging mostly, but how do we think about plastic materials, how to keep those materials in circulation, and how to design those materials better.
Excellent. Very exciting and such a key part to all of the sustainability mix. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, I actually started off at Green Blue about 10 years ago. It was a different organization, a little smaller. We were kind of exploring some of the sustainability questions that I feel like we might take for granted today. But I started off in forest products. So really looking at, how do we source fiber for paper-based packaging and looking at everything from sourcing to recyclability. And in the last year or so, I've changed my position to partnerships where we're really strategically focusing on partners that are working on similar initiatives, sustainability projects as we are, and finding ways to go to scale or share resources, create critical mass on some of the important issues that we share with our key partners.
That's excellent. And you have a very important role at the events, the SPC events. I've ended up on a couple of your excursions. So one part of the SPC that a lot of people don't know about is that at each event, it's not just staying in the hotel. We go to different things. Do you want to speak to that a little bit and talk about maybe some of the neat excursions that we've got to experience?
Yeah, sure. I'm glad you bring that up because I was actually at an event last week and someone was telling me how much they like sort of the random networking that happens at SPC where one example is the tours. So we have a lot of great tours where we'll go to MRFs, we'll visit different packaging plants, all kinds of great events. Luckily, and you and I got to go on this one last time, every once in a while we get one that is maybe a little bit more unique and we got to go to the Porsche Racing Center and Museum, which was great. So I was looking forward to the whole event in Austin or in Atlanta this last time, but the Porsche tour was one thing that was definitely on my calendar. So we had a great time there. You end up on the bus with people that you didn't really expect and get to have some great conversations. So the tours are sometimes the best parts of the events for a lot of people.
I agree. And the events are incredible. The speakers that you choose and are top notch, but you're right. It's exciting to get to go on the tours. I got to meet Linda from Kraft Heinz. We just ended up sitting next to each other on the bus on the way to the paper factory. And I thought, wow, this is awesome. Just to get to meet her. She's such a neat person. But anyways, let's go back to a little bit about sustainable packaging. And Ruth, let's start with you. I get this question a lot. How do we choose a material versus a different material when selecting packaging? Are there guidelines that you go by?
I would say it's a lot about trade-offs and what your priorities are for that packaging. The most important thing when it comes to packaging is that packaging serves a really important purpose. So we don't want to prioritize the material so much that the performance of that package actually is disadvantaged. But then I think it's about what your priorities are. Thinking about, paper and plastic as just an example. Paper has some advantages in that it's more recyclable right now in our current system. At least traditional paper packaging. There's some questions about that with the newer paper formats that are coming out, but plastic is less recyclable currently. But there may be cases where plastic can perform a job that paper can't do, or that you would need a lot more paper to perform the same job as a thin layer of plastic. So those are things to be thinking about. If you're going to be packaging food, thinking about how do you reduce food waste, that's a really high priority in terms of sustainability because food waste is a huge contributor to emissions, and that's kind of far outweighs the impact sometimes of the packaging, which is what we can get a little bit caught up in sometimes. So thinking about the bigger impact of the system, what's the job that packaging is doing, and then from there, thinking about what material will suit that purpose.
Yeah, well said. So important to talk about the longevity of the item. And, there's nothing sustainable about rotten food. It's something we often say on this show. And that's such an important key point there. How about you, Tom? Same question.
Yeah, I mean, Ruth did a great job explaining that. So maybe a couple of examples just to kind of put a finer point on it. But, I think you want to look at the technical feasibility, the technical performance of a package. So I was talking to someone last week from the medical devices and medical packaging field. So they're actually regulated by the FDA. So there's just certain types of packaging based on, if something's sterile or the different health implications of that material. So they really don't necessarily have a choice in materials for their packaging. So once you've kind of figured out the technical feasibility, then you can, I think, get into more of the sustainability criteria. And really that comes down to, as Ruth said so well, what's the job it's supposed to do? And what are your sustainability goals? So I did bring an example that might be helpful, but this is, I think everyone's familiar with a soda case here. And this is one where this particular company decided to move to a fiber-based format. So they knew they could get the technical and performance characteristics to carry a 6-pack of mini ginger ales, but decided to use fiber because they thought it would meet more of their sustainability goals. And then, of course, the last piece, which we can't forget, is cost. So there may be, excellent sustainability considerations and opportunities, but the cost can sometimes be prohibitive. So it's great to see all the innovation, especially going on with paper packaging. And as Ruth said, choosing between paper and plastic isn't a one-size-fit-all. You really have to kind of consider those 3 elements.
Excellent points, Tom. Thank you so much. And I like that example a lot. It's a perfect one because it's been highly debated in the industry, and I think people still are firm on both sides. So we'll see how that one shakes out.
Did you notice the on-pack label there too?
I did, sir. Yes, the how to recycle. We should speak to that a little bit. Does one of you want to speak to the how to recycle label and how that came about? It's such a cool story.
Ruth, feel free to kick us off.
Yeah, I don't know if I can speak to how it came about, but it's meant to be clear communication to consumers about how to recycle different packaging components. So I think on that package, there are 2 different parts to the label because there are 2 different materials that are part of that package. And, sometimes they may both be recyclable, sometimes not. So teaching consumers what they need to separate. Do they need to take some pieces apart? Or is one part recyclable and the other part isn't? If it's all one material, that's great, but still there's a lot of confusion about recycling and where things go, and packages that look exactly alike, even to someone who's in the field, it's not necessarily a given that that thing is going to be recyclable when the other one isn't. So there's a lot to wade through, and as clear and as simple as we can make it, the better off we are.
Well said. And Tom, the impetus for the how to recycle label started as the SPC committee, if I'm not mistaken. Is that
That's right. No, I'm really glad you asked that too. And I think Ruth did a great job explaining, what the label is meant to do. I mean, it was a process that we did with our members, with our partners, and it really started off as a conversation in SPC conference where, somebody asked, what if we had a label on packaging so people knew what to do with it? Because we've heard of wish cycling and people throwing things in blue bins that shouldn't be there, or not throwing things in the blue bin that should be there. So this is really a way to help the consumer with these really clear, helpful labels understand whether or not they can put their material into the blue bin, or if it should be dropped off at a store that has a store drop off, or if it's something where you need to check locally and see what your local infrastructure can accept. So it's been really successful, and I'm always proud to show examples to people of the how to recycle label on all kinds of products and packages.
It really has done an impressive job. I was just at APEC Monday, and we were talking about the ways that the organization can be more effective. And I used the how to recycle label from the SPC as an example of something very successful that came out of a nonprofit organization and has been making an impressive change in the way that consumers recycle packaging. So well done.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, it just shows the power of collaboration and collective action.
Yeah. There's 20 economies represented by APEC, and they were all very interested in that concept. So we talked about it in length. It was really cool.
Great.
But let's talk about flexible packaging. And Ruth, I'd like to talk to you about how has flexible packaging changed? And as far as the end of life for it, are there different considerations being made? Are there different materials being introduced? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so flexible packaging, my impression of it's a growing area. Flexible packaging is being used more and more. And my understanding of why that is because it uses a lot less material than some other packaging formats to perform the same job. That's really great in terms of things like carbon emissions, whether for transportation or for just the usage of material in general. So it has some great benefits, but the other side of the coin is that flexible packaging is challenging to deal with when it's, when it's been used. So thinking about end of life solutions, and if it's going to be adopted more and more, we need to be thinking about that end of life phase from the beginning, from the design phase. So there are end of life options. They all need, further support, further growth. One of those is mechanical recycling typically, and that would be material collected through the store drop-off system. There's still, I think, a lot of confusion about that type of flexible packaging format, that people think that they can put it in their regular recycling bin because it may have the chasing arrow symbol. They think, okay, it's recyclable, let's just throw it in there. But that's everything from grocery bags to your plastic mailers to bread bags and all those sorts of things. So it is a separate stream as of right now. There are some trials and pilots to see what it would look like to collect that material curbside, but it's difficult. In terms of innovation, there's, on the material side, trying to design that material that if it does get collected, that it can be a higher quality. So that often looks like, minimizing the number of materials, going to all polyethylene, for example, rather than something that has 5 or 6 different layers of materials that you could recycle, but it's going to be not a great product that anybody wants to buy and use again. So those things are there. There's also, work on compostable films to think about if it's not going to be recycled, what are the other pathways? Again, we need more infrastructure and support for being able to collect and actually compost material in more places around the country. And then there's different recycling technologies that can potentially take either mixtures of different types of film or, have slightly different specifications for what they can take. But still, there's that design component that if it's recycling, we can't just put everything in there together. We still want to have clean, sorted, and, a minimal number of different materials that are in that stream, regardless of what the recycling method is. So there's work in a lot of different areas, but it's a little slow. It's a complicated area. And I think all of those areas need to be supported more so that we can, fit them into to solve pieces of the problem and eventually get the whole thing to work a bit better.
Points, the process takes time. And I think we need to be patient, but aggressive. And you're exactly right. There are some success stories with a switch to monomaterial, even multi-layer monomaterial. When I first heard that, I said, what? But these companies are making major advances to successful, like Tom said at the beginning, it must work. It must be effective first, and then recyclable second. Yeah, very well said. So let's switch gears a little bit to paper packaging. Tom, you just released a new resource with a very long title, so I'm going to read it here.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Paper Packaging Recyclability Test Methods and Specifications Guide. Tell us about that. What is that?
Yeah, it's, at the end of the day, it is a document that is meant to give people an overview, sort of a recyclability 101 of what's the technical process to determine if a paper package is recyclable. So we went through a lot of different titles, and we thought that being specific there would help us the most. But this was another collaborative, an SPC collaborative, which is part of our Sustainable Packaging Coalition. We have over 650 members of SPC, ranging across materials, supply chains, from brand owners to material manufacturers. And with that, large of a membership, we have these collaboratives, which are basically industry work groups where they'll really focus in on one particular challenge or question that they have. And this one was called the Mixed Paper Collaborative. And basically, they were trying to explore the question of how do I understand how a paper package is tested for whether it's recyclable, And then I could use that in how I design a package. So I think there was sort of a general idea of how that process works. We know that there's laboratories out there that you can send your package to, and they'll come back with a report. But we really wanted to kind of break it down into accessible, understandable pieces so that somebody that might not have a scientific or technical background can sort of understand how that process works. So it was actually a really interesting process. We got to work with partners like the Fiber Box Association, AF&PA, the American Forest Paper Association, TLMI. We brought in, a really big tent to develop this guide. And it really basically takes you step by step through the process from, how packages goes through the testing process, what that report looks like, how to interpret the results from that report. Again, so that when it goes back to the design team or folks that are working on sustainability initiatives and goals at the organizations, that they can, start with some information so that when they're, like we're looking at the ginger ale, a 6-pack carrier, they can start with an idea of once it gets out into the marketplace, will that be technically recycled? Of course, there's other elements that determine if something is considered recyclable, which we can get into. But this guide was specifically looking at that step of the process of recyclability. So can it go through a pulper and be screened and sorted so that you get an appropriate fiber yield to then reuse into another product? I wasn't going to get technical, but I couldn't help myself at the end there.
You're both too smart for me. This is great. I think it's impressive, and we need to be technical and talk about those differences, but we also need to be able to educate somebody who is a consumer or somebody inside a business that maybe doesn't have a packaging background. So to be able to speak to something in a way that all can understand, but then people like you two and I'm working on it, but that technical experts can understand as well. So very, very important. So the last one I had for you specifically, Tom, was about the CEPI webinar. What is that, and what did the audience learn about in that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. CEPI, or some folks call it CEPI, it's the Confederation of European Paper Industries. So they are an association in Europe that represents the pulp and paper industry, but it's their the work they do really expands into circularity and recyclability and lots of sustainability issues. They do a lot of great work. So I recommend anyone to take a look at their website. We had 2 speakers one was from CEPI, one was actually from DS Smith, which is is a packaging company that's based out of the UK. And we really invited them to speak to us about the recyclability testing specifically. It was sort of part of when this report came out. But I think more importantly, what's happening in the EU in terms of their challenges and questions around packaging, sustainability, and recyclability. So Maria, I had to write it down because I don't want to get her name wrong. Georgiade from CEPI and Guy Lacey from DS Smith. Maria really took us through regulation and how that's influencing packaging design in Europe. So you've probably heard of the single-use plastics ban. So she really gave a really interesting perspective about how those different regulations in the EU are affecting packaging design, which is quite a bit. And then Guy from DS Smith kind of took us through the technical process of how recyclability works in the MRFs and reprocessors in the UK. And I think that the takeaways that were really interesting from that was that a lot of the same questions that we're asking in the United States and Canada and North America are the same questions that they're working on there, where we kind of have parallel paths, even though sometimes the drivers are a little bit different. And then, second, and we got this from a lot of the comments from our members, was there's so many opportunities to work together. The processes and the questions and the challenges are also similar. It just makes sense to do more work together from, CEPI and with organizations here. And many of the members that we have are global brands. So let's, see if we can define recyclability and the guidelines and the best practices the same way in North America and Europe and beyond, so that we're all kind of working from the same guidebook.
Absolutely correct. The Europeans, and thankfully, they're taking risks right now. Mm-hmm. When I was in Paris in January at Paris Packaging Week, I was amazed at the efforts they're taking. It's an incredible time to be a part of the sustainable packaging for sure. And I think they're going to learn a lot. And I think we should ask them, hey, did that work? Or what do you recommend we do here in the US and the rest of the world?
Absolutely.
I think that leads right into this next question really well. And Ruth, I was hoping to get some more insights on how do you design a package for recycling?
That's a great question. And I think it depends. So Tom kind of hinted at, there's more parts to recyclability than just the technical part. That is part of it. I think recyclability overall depends on where you are, the context, and what kind of infrastructure you have there for the other pieces, which are collection, sortation. Can it be reprocessed? And then is there a market for the material? But on the design side, you can think about, like a test method, like what Tom was describing for paper, thinking about on the reprocessability side, how do you design a package from the beginning, keeping in mind, like, can that material technically be recycled? And then can you design even for the sortation systems where you are? So there are some differences between Europe or the US or Australia, for example, on like what kind of sorting infrastructure there is. And especially for plastics, the extent to which plastics are sorted out into different streams versus they're all just kind of bundled together in one stream. So thinking about how is a material going to travel through a typical material recovery facility in the place that you are? Is it big enough that it can actually be collected and it's not going to fall through the cracks? Or do you need some kind of, there's some innovations also coming out in how do we capture smaller materials that typically would fall through the cracks in that sorting process. So keeping those things in mind and kind of having some understanding of what is the pathway of a package from use to all the way to actually making it to be recycled into a new product. What are all the steps and stages that it needs to successfully make it through, and designing the best you can with those things in mind. It is tough, I think, to design sometimes when there isn't great infrastructure. You can make something be completely technically recyclable, but if those other pieces are missing, then it's the challenge of not the technical design, but how do you support the infrastructure? And I think that collaboration piece comes into it too, that we're talking about, of how do we support the systems to work better.
Yeah, what's the point of making something recyclable if it's not going to get recycled? Well, I think you have to attempt it. You have to try, right? You have to hope for the best sometimes, and then work on the other side of the coin, which is availability. And we need movement on all of those fronts at the same time, because I think sometimes people say, well, it's the collection that's holding us from flexible packaging recycling, but there are countries that they do collect flexible packaging curbside, and they're still having challenges of actually then getting it sorted and processed. Like it's not that any one piece by itself solves a problem. We kind of need all those areas to be working in tandem. Excellent point. The store drop-off system has worked really well for companies like Trex Decking. They've recycled over 1 billion pounds of flexible films, and that's incredible to think about that. They've turned it into building materials, so that's awesome. I love that kind of a story. They've also recycled, I don't know how many millions of pounds of wood. So that alone, those two things are just incredible to me. So you guys have an event coming up here for the SPC, the Sustainable Packaging Coalition in Austin in April 24th through 27th. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, Tom? And what can we expect there?
Yeah, SPC Impact in Austin in April. We've already, I guess the first thing I would say is if you haven't got your tickets yet, you should, because we've already sold, I think, 400 tickets to it. And members, get their tickets, but we have 400 registrations, I should say, already. And we're really looking at, a range of different topics. I think what's really interesting about the SPC and the way that our team at Green Blue sets it up is there's a number of different tracks. So, we can start off with, if you're sort of looking at, what are the essentials of learning about sustainable packaging, you can start there. We'll be talking about recyclability of plastics and molecular recycling. We'll be talking more about paper packaging recyclability. So we've got a number of excellent speakers and panels, lots of great tours. I don't think we're going to, any Porsche museums, but there's going to be something, I think, lots of interesting things. I think they're actually going to go check out the Austin MLS team's stadium, which would be cool. So we've got a range of great tours. So I would make sure you register if you're an SPC member now, and sign up for those tours as soon as you can. So
yeah, I'll be there for sure. Looking forward to it.
Good.
Ruth, anything I didn't ask you that you wish I would have?
I think we covered most of these topics pretty well. Yeah, is there stuff that we have mentioned that we could could go into more depth. I think at one point, Tom, were you gonna maybe add something in about flexible packaging?
Yeah, that's very perceptive. I think if I go back to what I was going to say is, it's really good that people like Ruth are working on this, because understanding the science and the chemistry behind this is really key. I think, we oftentimes go to, what we think is the most recyclable solution, but that's not always the case. And with flexibles, a common denominator for a lot of companies is climate change and carbon accounting. And, flexible packaging offers a lot of benefits in sort of the world of carbon. So Ruth was talking about trade-offs. So something may or not be more recyclable, but it may or may not be heavier or require more materials or more energy to produce. So there's also that carbon part of the equation as well. So I think understanding flexibles and understanding the chemistry and the science behind it, and having folks that understand that really working on it through a sustainability lens is really important. So thanks for asking, Ruth.
Yeah, maybe something I'll add there is that I think it's important to keep challenging our assumptions about what sustainable packaging is and what that looks like. There's, we have data on that to guide us, but I think there's always new research coming out and, new test methods, new information that maybe is different than what we have assumed to be the case, or that the consumer might assume, oh, this one looks eco-friendly, and whatever that is. How do we challenge our assumptions about what sustainable packaging is? And then how do we share that information with the industry and with consumers too?
Excellent point. And how do we continuously update that? Because it seems to change weekly with the onset of extended producer responsibility and all these new materials that are coming out. This show and what you're doing at the SPC in Green Blue is critical to education for not only the industry, but to consumers.
I think Ruth summed up perfectly about challenging assumptions. I mean, in terms of, the evidence of recyclability, here's this noise out there is working, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at the investments that are happening, and you look at the news, even just last week, you Google about, who is investing into recyclability infrastructure, who's looking at these materials that are being recovered. These end markets are real. People are investing millions of dollars into collecting, sorting, reprocessing, and finding new materials, new packaging to put these materials into. So there's a lot of value there, and there's a strong business case. So I think everyone, working on these things together, pushing the innovation is really important, and it's really happening. It's not something that is pie in the sky.
Yeah, well said. And with the onset of Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 reporting and all these new guidelines that are coming out, it's going to be required. We're going to have to figure it out. So we might as well jump on it now and get ahead of it, right? So
absolutely.
Well, thank you both. I appreciate your wisdom, and looking forward to the next episode. We'll do another one of these, or maybe several more if Danielle and I can get it all figured out. I think we will. If you're listening, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode, and stay tuned for more. Thank you.
Thanks, Cory.
Thanks, Cory.
Thanks, Ruth.